Story 1. This story was sent to me by Sarah Chen via email. I was sitting in my car in complete darkness, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, watching this guy pace back and forth outside a house that definitely wasn't his. But let me back up and tell you how this all started. I had been on Tinder for about 3 months after my last relationship ended. Nothing too serious, just casual dating to get back out there. I matched with this guy, Marcus, who seemed really sweet in his messages. He was a graduate student, loved hiking, had this infectious laugh in his voice messages. We texted for about 2 weeks before he asked me out for dinner. He suggested this nice Italian place downtown that I had actually been wanting to try. When I got there, he was already waiting outside, which I thought was considerate. He looked exactly like his photos, maybe even better. Tall, well-dressed, bright smile. Dinner went really well. He was charming, asked thoughtful questions about my work, shared funny stories about his research. I was actually thinking this might be the start of something good. After dinner, he offered to walk me to my car, which was parked a few blocks away. As we were walking, he mentioned that his apartment was just around the corner and asked if I wanted to see his view of the city. I politely declined, saying I had work early the next morning. His demeanor shifted slightly, but he just said, maybe next time, and kept walking. When we got to my car, instead of saying goodbye, he asked if I could give him a ride home since his Uber was taking forever. I felt a little awkward saying no after such a nice evening, so I agreed. He directed me through several turns, and I started noticing we were heading into a residential area that seemed pretty far from downtown. After about 15 minutes of driving, he told me to pull over in front of this house. It was a modest 2-story home with no lights on. I expected him to get out and thank me, but instead he just sat there. When I asked if this was his place, he said, not exactly, and started explaining that he was house-sitting for a friend who was out of town. Something about his tone made my stomach drop. He then asked if I wanted to come in and see the place. When I said no, he didn't move to get out. Instead, he started talking about how he could tell I was interested in him and that he had been thinking about me all week. The way he said it felt wrong, too intense, like he had built up some fantasy in his head. I told him again that I needed to get home, and that's when he reached over and put his hand on my thigh. I immediately moved his hand away and told him firmly that I wasn't comfortable. He laughed it off, but didn't apologize. Instead, he said something about how I was playing hard to get and that he knew I wanted this too. Every alarm bell in my head was going off. I realized I was parked in front of a dark house in an unfamiliar neighborhood with someone who clearly wasn't respecting my boundaries. I told him he needed to get out of my car right now. His expression changed completely. The charming smile was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. He didn't move. Instead, he started talking about how he had put effort into this evening, how he deserved something for the nice dinner. I could feel panic rising in my chest. I reached for my phone to call someone, and he grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make his point clear. I looked him straight in the eye and said in the strongest voice I could manage that he had exactly 10 seconds to get out of my car or I would start screaming and honking my horn to wake up the entire neighborhood. For a moment that felt like forever, we just stared at each other. Then he let go of my wrist, but not before leaning down to my window. He tapped on the glass and said, "You know where I go to school, Sarah, and I know where you work." Then he walked toward the house. I immediately locked my doors and started to drive away, but in my rearview mirror, I saw him just standing by the front door, not going inside. He was watching my car leave. I drove straight to the nearest police station and sat in their parking lot for 20 minutes, shaking. I called my best friend and told her everything. She convinced me to file a report, even though I wasn't sure what crime had been committed. The officer was kind and took down all the information, including screenshots of our Tinder conversation. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number with a photo of the building where I work. No words, just the photo. I immediately called the police and showed them. They said they would increase patrols in my area and suggested I vary my routine for a while. I also reached out to Tinder support and reported his profile with all the evidence. For the next 2 weeks, I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I asked friends to walk me to my car after work. I changed my route home every day. The worst part was not knowing if that house was really where he lived or if he had just picked it randomly to make me feel isolated and vulnerable. I never heard from him again after that text, but it took months before I felt completely safe again. I realized how quickly a seemingly normal date could turn dangerous when someone doesn't respect basic boundaries. Now, I always meet dates in public places and drive myself, and I trust my instincts immediately when something feels off. Story 2. I found this on a Reddit thread by user Urban Explorer 92. I spent 2 hours locked in a bathroom while someone tried to break down the door. This happened on what was supposed to be a casual coffee date with a girl I had been chatting with for weeks. Her name was Jessica, and we had connected over our shared love of photography and travel. Our conversations felt so natural and easy. She was studying art history, had these amazing stories about backpacking through Europe, and seemed genuinely interested in my work as a freelance graphic designer. When she suggested meeting for coffee at this little place she knew, I was excited. The coffee shop she chose was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with, kind of industrial and quiet. When I got there, it looked closed. The lights were off and there was a temporarily closed sign on the door. I texted Jessica to let her know, and she replied immediately, saying to meet her at the address she was sending instead, that it was just around the corner. The address led me to what looked like a converted warehouse with a few small businesses on the ground floor. There was a small cafe sign, but it also looked closed. I was starting to feel confused when Jessica appeared from a side entrance. She looked exactly like her photos, which was a relief, and apologized profusely about the mix-up. She explained that the owner was a friend of hers who was letting us use the space even though they were closed for renovations. She had a key and everything seemed legitimate. The space was actually really cool, very artistic and bohemian with exposed brick walls and interesting lighting. She made coffee on this expensive-looking espresso machine, and we sat at a small table near the window. For the first hour, everything was normal. Great conversation, lots of laughs, and I was thinking this might turn into something special. Then I noticed a man walk past the window several times. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but Jessica seemed to be watching him too. When I mentioned it, she quickly changed the subject. About 30 minutes later, I heard the front door open. Jessica immediately stood up and said she would go check who it was. I heard her talking to someone in hushed tones near the entrance, but couldn't make out what they were saying. When she came back, she seemed nervous and kept glancing toward the front of the cafe. She suggested we move to the back room where it was more comfortable. The back room had a couch and some chairs, but something felt off about the whole setup. There were personal items scattered around, like someone had been staying there, and I noticed the windows were covered with thick curtains. When I asked about it, Jessica said her friend sometimes crashed there between apartments. Then I heard the front door again, followed by multiple sets of footsteps. Jessica's whole demeanor changed. She started talking faster, asking personal questions about my work schedule, whether I lived alone, if anyone knew where I was tonight. The questions felt invasive and weird, especially given the context. I stood up and said I thought we should probably head out. That's when Jessica positioned herself between me and the door we had come through. She said we should wait a little longer because her friends wanted to meet me. I hadn't heard her mention any friends coming, and I definitely hadn't agreed to meet anyone else. I could hear voices getting closer, and Jessica kept stalling, asking me to sit back down, offering me more coffee. Every instinct I had was screaming that something was very wrong. I told her I really needed to leave and started walking toward the door. She grabbed my arm and said just 5 more minutes, but her grip was firm and her eyes looked desperate. That's when I heard one of the voices say something about getting this done quickly, and I realized I might be in serious danger. I pushed past Jessica and headed for what I thought was the exit, but the door was locked. I tried another door and found myself in a small bathroom. Jessica was right behind me, trying to convince me to come back out, saying I was misunderstanding the situation. I locked the bathroom door and immediately called 911. While I was whispering to the dispatcher, I could hear Jessica talking to at least 2 other people outside the door. One of them, a man's voice, was getting agitated and saying they needed to finish this now. Someone started rattling the door handle, then pushing against the door. The bathroom had a small window, but it was too high and too small for me to escape through. I was trapped. The pushing against the door got more aggressive, and I could hear them discussing whether they could break it down without making too much noise. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, giving them the address and describing the situation as quietly as I could. Then someone started actually throwing their weight against the door. The frame was starting to crack. I could hear Jessica arguing with whoever was out there, saying this wasn't part of the plan, that they were going too far. But the banging continued. I pressed my back against the far wall and prepared for the worst. Just when I thought the door was about to give way, I heard sirens approaching. The banging stopped immediately. I heard rapid footsteps and hushed arguing, then silence. The police arrived about 3 minutes later and found the cafe empty except for me in the bathroom. When I came out, the officers found evidence that people had been staying in the back room for weeks. There were sleeping bags, personal belongings, and what looked like a setup for some kind of scam operation. Jessica and whoever else was there had vanished completely, leaving behind only some fake IDs and a notebook with names and personal information about various people. The police explained that this was likely part of a romance scam operation where they would lure people to isolated locations, rob them, and potentially worse. They said I was lucky to have trusted my instincts and gotten to safety when I did. The investigation revealed that the cafe had been closed for months and the real owner had no idea people were using his space. I never found out what exactly they had planned for me that night, and honestly, I don't want to know. Jessica's Tinder profile was deleted within hours, and none of the personal information she shared with me checked out. It took me over a year before I felt comfortable meeting anyone from online dating again, and I never go anywhere without telling multiple people exactly where I'll be. Story 3. This was shared with me on Instagram by Michael Torres. The GPS led me to a dead-end road in the middle of nowhere, and my date was standing there in the darkness, smiling. But something about that smile made every hair on my body stand up. I had been talking to Emma for about a month before we decided to meet. She was different from other girls I had matched with, really into outdoor adventures and hiking. She had these amazing photos from national parks and mountain trails. When she suggested we meet for a sunset hike at this spot she knew outside the city, it sounded perfect. She sent me detailed directions because she said GPS sometimes got confused in that area. The drive took about 45 minutes, getting more rural as I went. Cell service started cutting in and out, which she had warned me about. I wasn't worried because she seemed to know the area really well and had been hiking there for years, according to her stories. When I arrived at the coordinates she had given me, I found myself on a narrow dirt road that ended at a small parking area. There were no other cars around, which struck me as odd for a popular hiking spot. But Emma had said we were meeting right at sunset to avoid crowds. The area was heavily wooded with no visible trail markers or signs. Emma appeared from the tree line just as I was getting out of my car. She looked like her photos, athletic build, long brown hair, but something seemed different about her energy. She was more intense in person, almost manic in her enthusiasm about showing me this special place she had found. She immediately started walking toward the woods, saying we needed to hurry to catch the sunset. I asked about the trail, and she said it was just a short walk through the trees. No marked path, just follow her. As we walked deeper into the woods, I realized I had no idea where we were going or how to get back without her. The terrain got rougher and more confusing. We were climbing over fallen logs and pushing through thick undergrowth. This definitely wasn't a maintained hiking trail. When I asked Emma about it, she said the best spots were always off the beaten path. But we had been walking for almost 30 minutes, and there was no sign of any clearing or viewpoint. Then my phone completely lost signal. I mentioned it to Emma, and she said that was normal, that we were in a dead zone. But something about the way she said it made me uncomfortable. She seemed almost pleased that I couldn't get a signal. When I suggested we turned back since it was getting dark, she insisted we were almost there. That's when I noticed we had been walking in a rough circle. I recognized a distinctive fallen tree that we had passed earlier. When I pointed this out, Emma claimed I was mistaken, but I was certain. She was leading me in circles, deeper into the woods as darkness fell around us. I stopped walking and told Emma I wanted to head back to the cars. She turned around with that same intense smile and said we couldn't leave yet, that she had gone to a lot of trouble to get me out here. The way she said, "get me out here," sent chills down my spine. This wasn't about hiking or watching a sunset. She started talking about how she had been watching my social media, how she knew my schedule, where I worked, where I lived. Information that wasn't in my Tinder profile. She mentioned details about my daily routine that she couldn't have known unless she had been following me or researching me extensively. I realized that Emma had deliberately brought me to an isolated location where I couldn't call for help and where no one would think to look for me. I had told my roommate I was going on a hike, but I hadn't shared the specific location because Emma had said it was her secret spot. When I started walking back the way I thought we had come, Emma followed me, continuing to talk about how we were meant to be together and how she had been planning this meeting for weeks. She knew things about my ex-girlfriend, about my family, about my job that I had never shared with her. She had been stalking my online presence far more thoroughly than I had realized. The woods were getting darker by the minute, and I was starting to panic about finding my way back. Every direction looked the same, and Emma kept trying to convince me to follow her deeper into the trees. She said she had a campsite set up where we could spend the night together. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to try to retrace our steps, following broken branches and disturbed ground. Emma became more agitated, saying I was ruining everything, that she had put so much work into planning this perfect evening. Her voice was getting louder and more unstable. Finally, I saw a faint glow through the trees that I hoped was the road. I started moving toward it as quickly as I could, with Emma calling after me, her voice echoing through the dark woods. She was saying things about how I couldn't just leave her there, how we belonged together, how she wouldn't let me go. I reached the parking area and ran to my car. Emma appeared from the trees just as I was starting the engine. She stood directly in front of my car, arms spread wide, demanding that I turn off the engine and come back. I honked the horn several times and slowly moved forward. She finally stepped aside, but I could see her in my headlights, just standing there, watching me leave. The drive back to civilization felt like the longest 45 minutes of my life. As soon as I got cell service, I called the police and reported the incident. They said they would send someone to check the area, but when I described the location, they said it was part of a large wooded area with multiple access points. Later that week, I discovered that Emma had created multiple fake social media accounts to gather information about me. She had been liking and commenting on posts from months ago, building a detailed picture of my life. Her Tinder profile was deleted immediately after our date, and when I tried to search for her online, I found no trace of anyone matching her description. The police never found her, and I never learned her real name or what she had actually planned for that night in the woods. I just know that I came very close to finding out, and that realization still keeps me awake sometimes. I never went on another hiking date with someone I hadn't known for months, and I always tell multiple people exactly where I'm going and when I'll be back. Story 4. Someone DM'd me this on Twitter. I was trapped in a moving car going 90 miles per hour down the highway while my date screamed into his phone about someone owing him money. But let me back up and tell you how this nightmare began. I had matched with Ryan about 3 weeks earlier. He seemed normal enough, worked in sales, had photos of himself at baseball games and barbecues with friends. Our conversations were light and funny, nothing that raised any red flags. When he asked me out for dinner, I suggested a restaurant near my apartment, but he said he knew a better place across town that I would love. He offered to pick me up, which I normally wouldn't agree to on a first date, but we had been talking for weeks and he seemed harmless. When he pulled up in a nice sedan, well-dressed and smiling, I felt comfortable enough to get in. He had music playing and was making casual conversation about traffic and weekend plans. The restaurant he had chosen was about 20 minutes away in a part of the city I didn't know well. As we drove, he got a phone call through his car's Bluetooth system. He answered it even though we were mid-conversation, which I thought was rude. The person on the other end sounded agitated, talking about meeting somewhere and settling something. Ryan told whoever it was that he was busy and would call them back later. But his whole demeanor had changed. He seemed distracted and kept checking his mirrors more than normal. When I asked if everything was okay, he brushed it off and said it was just work drama. We never made it to the restaurant. About halfway there, Ryan's phone rang again. This time he looked at the caller ID and his face went pale. He answered and immediately started arguing with whoever was on the other end. They were talking about money, about deadlines, about consequences. Ryan kept saying he just needed more time. Then the person on the phone said something that made Ryan slam on the brakes. We were stopped at a red light, and I thought about getting out, but we were on a busy street with no sidewalk. Ryan was having a heated argument about owing someone $15,000 in missing payments. When the light turned green, instead of continuing toward the restaurant, Ryan made a sharp turn onto the highway entrance ramp. I asked where we were going, and he said we needed to make a quick stop first. But the way he said it, combined with the phone call, made me realize this wasn't about dinner anymore. His phone rang for the third time, and this conversation was different. Angry voices were coming through the speakers, making threats about